Okay, we're live. We're back. I actually have two topics I want to cover today, so I'm going to do. This is going to be brief, and there really isn't much to say about this topic. I might do another video later in the day about the other thing that's maybe a little more involved, having to do with Southeast Asia. But right now, yesterday, I talked about the very strange series of events that took place in the city of Houston in the state of Texas that had people puzzled at the time. There's a lot of more puzzling conjecture going on in the days after. Most of the focus, of course, is on what happened to Houston and the infrastructure in the suburbs around there and how hard it's going to be to fix all that and all the hundreds of thousands of people without power during a heat wave and all that kind of stuff. So it's understandable that they're going to deal with the aftermath. But the real story in Houston is, what the hell was that? Right. So go back and watch my previous video where I run that down. Spoiler alert. If you haven't watched that video, maybe you want to go back and watch it. But spoiler alert, here's what I think happened. They had probably, I mean, it probably wasn't a hurricane, but it was probably a tropical storm. They had a tropical storm that formed in the suburbs of northern Houston that brought, and it was a powerful tropical storm. There were like 100-mile-an-hour winds peaking to like 120 or 150. So this was hurricane force, but it didn't really get organized enough to be a hurricane. It had many hurricane-like attributes, but it probably was just half of a hurricane. Literally half of the, hurricanes go around, right? So this was half of a go around. It spun up very quickly, lasted only a little while, and then it just kind of disappeared. But the attributes associated with this thing, its size, its wind field, the velocity of the winds, had a lot of characteristics of a hurricane. And I said at the time, in the last video, okay, conditions are the same across the U.S. Southeast as they are in eastern Texas. There's lots of water on the ground. There's lots of flooding. They've had heat waves. The water is hot. That's what these cyclones look for. Not tornadoes so much, because they originate in the atmosphere and then they come down to the land. But these surface manifestations of these rotating wind fields are looking for hot water. And when they find it, they can spin up. And that's kind of what happened in Houston, probably. And that could happen elsewhere in the Southeast. So what happened yesterday, like 6 hours after I made that video? What happened yesterday? Well, I don't know where I was, what I was doing, but I saw that Max Velocity, that's the name of the channel. I don't think that's his actual name. I'll call him Max. That Max Velocity was doing some storm chasing in Kansas. Big storm in Kansas. So I said, that's interesting. We just had big storms in Kansas. So I jumped on there and I looked at that. And no sooner did I get the audio for that stream than he was talking about a hurricane in Kansas. Scratching my head, right? He's talking about a hurricane in Kansas. And I realized about 10 seconds into it that he's joking. And the people in his stream chat are talking about how big is the hurricane in Kansas, and they should make a merch T-shirt celebrating the hurricane in Kansas. And he was laughing about it, and so I went to the radar image and I looked at it, and it was a goddamn hurricane in Kansas. No joke. Now, low pressure centers, when they're passing across the country, they can be huge. And it's low pressure centers that eventually give rise to hurricanes, right? That's how a hurricane starts. It starts as an unorganized low, and then it becomes a tropical storm, and then the tropical storm, because it's over hot water, spins up to become a Category 1 hurricane, and you're off to the races. So a low pressure center passing over the country, if it's got a lot of clouds in it and a lot of rain, it'll show up as like a comma. So it has kind of a rotational signature. All right. So these very deep lows can look like a tropical depression or can look like a tropical storm, because that's how those things get started. They get started as depressions, and then they of course they go further, but that's because they're over warm water. This is going to be a theme. Okay, right? You see the theme here? That's because these low pressure centers that form over water can go through cyclogenesis. They can become a disorganized tropical depression. They can become a tropical storm. They can become a Category 1 hurricane. But they're tropical, right? This is happening over the tropics. This is happening over the Caribbean Ocean. This is happening over West Africa and in the equatorial Atlantic. It's not happening over Kansas, right? What the hell? And so they were joking, the hurricane of Kansas, 2024, the hurricane in Kansas, and they're laughing and joking, and they're going to have a commemorative T-shirt, and they're going to have merch, and they're going to do all these things. And Max finally came out and said, "Okay, guys, stop talking like that on my channel." He finally realized. I think I was watching him for like a minute, and I was like, "What's going on here?" I mean, I just made a video about this 6 hours ago. What are these guys talking about now? And 6 hours ago, I predicted we could have another one of these right nearby because the conditions are still there. Whatever happened in Houston could happen someplace else. And now they're talking about it. And I was like watching this, I'm thinking, what are they going on about? What is really happening here? And I'm looking at the radar signature. I'm saying, God damn, that looks like a tropical storm in Kansas. What is going on? And he finally tamped it down. He's a serious guy. He's not that serious. Okay. But he realized, and he even said this essentially. Guys, people are going to think I'm a nut that we're having this discussion on my channel. All right. So this is not what's happening. There's not a hurricane in Kansas. There's not a whatever, it's not a tropical storm in Kansas. There's not a tropical depression in Kansas. Kansas isn't the tropics. And they changed the subject. And yet there it was on the radar signature going around like a tropical storm trying to become a hurricane. Now, he missed an opportunity here that I recognized 6 hours earlier, because I watched what happened in Houston, and then I put 2 and 2 together in my head. And because I'm a systems scientist and not a meteorologist, okay, I don't like to cap on the meteorologist, but let's just understand they got limits. Okay, there's limits to what they can see and what they can talk about. And they're afraid of getting out of their lane and doing climate science because their people just want to hear about the weather, right? They don't want to hear about climate science and hoaxes and the Chinese are doing all this and it's all a hoax and whatever. They don't want to hear about that. These are people from the Midwest and Florida and Texas. I mean, they're all climate deniers, right? So he's not going to talk about climate change. He's not going to talk about the brown ocean effect either. Why would he? That's not meteorology. That's climate science. So why would he talk about that? So he very quickly, I mean, not quickly, because I was there for like 5 minutes watching his stream, scratching my head. What are they talking about? What is happening here? Where is this going? And he finally tamped it down and says, okay, you guys, people got to calm down. This is not working for me. This is funny. This is a joke. We're talking about hurricanes in Kansas, but that's not what's happening. It's a large scale mesoconvection, whatever. He threw out a bunch of jargon. Okay. Sounding like a weatherman. Fine. Missed an opportunity to say that, dudes, we got a motherfucking, a tropical storm in Kansas. He could have said that, and he would be right. Now, where things don't align is that Kansas isn't in the tropics, but the tropics increasingly, as the future unrolls, okay, as the future invites us forward into the future, okay, as the future unrolls before us, and as we put our foot on that road and put our foot on that path and go into the future that's unrolling before us, the tropics don't stay in the tropics, right? Global heating. Think, chimps. Start thinking, using this 3.5 pounds of brain. Please start thinking. Why would the tropics stay in the tropics when the world is heating? Right? The tropics aren't just a certain latitude and longitude around the equator. The tropics are a set of conditions: warm water, warm air, a lot of convection, trade winds. Okay. Why would the tropics stay in the tropics if the globe is heating? You can have the tropics anywhere. You can have all those conditions anywhere. And there's a lot of evidence for this happening. There is. I don't want to go into it, but I've been watching for the last 2 years or so, especially during this El Nino phase that we happen to be in. I've been watching the tropics move north. And I presume that they're also moving south because it's, it happens on either side of the equator. There's a north and there's a south. So, but we're not in the south and we don't get to watch that happen. And no one down there cares. And they're not telling us what's going on. So But we do know what's happening in the north. So I've been watching the tropics move north. So Max was talking about this thing and he just kind of poo pooed it and said, this is nothing. But he missed an opportunity that I am now seizing upon. A tropical storm spinning up in Kansas is now a thing. It's official. We had a tropical storm, or maybe half of a hurricane, based on the wind field and the wind velocities, spun up in the suburbs of northern Houston. And Kansas is just, a hop, skip, and a jump north of there. And same conditions, brown ocean, lots of water, lots of flooding, lots of rain. The ground is saturated. There's lots of opportunity for these things to spin up now because you're looking like the tropics. You don't want to think of that because climate change is a hoax. But listen, motherfuckers, you're looking like the tropics. Okay? So just, that's your future. It's going to rain in the southeast in Kansas and around there. It's going to rain like a son of a bitch for probably the next 3 or 4 weeks. And it's going to be hot like a son of a bitch for the next 3 or 4 weeks. And if you get these rotating wind fields, they're going to look down. They're not looking up. They're looking down. And they're looking down there and they're seeing a brown ocean. It's hot. It's wet. There's standing water. And it's just going to say, hey, let's mix this up a little bit. Let's do a hurricane. How do you feel about that, folks? How do you feel about a tropical storm in Kansas? And that's what happened. I sat here last night, and after Max gave up on talking about hurricanes in Kansas, I sat here and I watched that thing. I just watched it rotating around, trying to form an eye wall. It was a tropical storm. It was just rotating around. It was the damnedest thing I've ever seen. And it's one of those moments where I, as a system scientist, who can sit back and look at whole systems like, okay, what's happening here, right? What's happening in Kansas? What the hell is this? This is a tropical storm trying to form up. What the hell is this happening in Kansas? Oh, that's right. There's a brown ocean there. And it's a tropical sea now. And Kansas now has tropical weather. And of course, there's going to be a tropical storm spin up because it's acting like the tropics. Why not? Right? Why not? Why can't we have a tropical storm in Kansas when Kansas is now part of the tropics? Stop me. Tell me where I'm wrong. Correct me that this is all made up and that I'm just making this shit up. I called it. I said the conditions are right for another one of these to happen. And it did. It didn't get as crazy as it did in Houston, but it doesn't have to. These are warnings. You're getting warnings. Things are changing. They talk about climate change. And they pretend they know what that means. They talk about climate change. Your climate is going to change. This is the danger of using terms like climate change. It doesn't mean anything. It has no information content. The planet is heating. There's your information. There's your physics. The planet is heating. It's heating up. What does that do? The tropics move. That's what that does. And pretty soon, Florida and Southern California and Texas, they're part of the tropics. And pretty soon, Kansas and Oklahoma, they're part of the tropics. And what happens when you're in the tropics? Well, if you've got enough hot water on the ground, you get tropical storm development. And that's what was happening in Kansas. Will people talk about that? I don't know. They probably should. But they won't, because the people whose lane that is, whose wheelhouse that is, are the meteorologists. Well, those people are practically useless for these discussions. They're not system scientists. So I don't want to be mean to the meteorologists. They're not system scientists. There's even a lot of climate scientists that are not system scientists. So I'm not going to be mean to them either. This is complicated shit. All right. This is really complicated. And you really have to have all your senses working, and you really have to have your aperture as wide as possible. You have to take in all this data. You have to process all these events, and you have to sit back and you have to ruminate over it. And you have to say, okay, how is all this shit connected? The system is huge. It's a global system. What is happening in the globe? What is happening in Italy? What is happening in the Mediterranean? What is happening in the Middle East? What is happening in Southeast Asia? What is happening in India? What's happening in the Southern Hemisphere? What's happening in the Antarctica? What's happening in the Arctic? What's happening on Greenland? You have to gather all this data from all these data points. You have to look at all this bullshit. And you have to process it all the time in your head. And then finally you start to put dots together and draw the line, and it's like, oh, hell. Tropical storms in Kansas. Who'd have thunk it? Well, I thunk it 6 hours before it happened. No, that doesn't make me a genius. Doesn't even make me right, because these things could be completely disconnected. But that's how you do it. You keep an eye out. And you watch these things happen. And when they happen and they're really weird, you don't just laugh about it and make a t-shirt. You know, the Kansas hurricane of 2024. You say, man, that looked a lot like a hurricane. Certainly looked like a tropical storm. And what if that thing had gotten an eye wall? What if that thing had generated 100-mile-an-hour winds like a tropical storm could certainly do? What would they call it then? Would they have a meteorological term that it's a mesocyclone, blah, blah, blah? It's like, why don't you just call it what it is, folks? We have a word for these things, tropical storms. But Kansas isn't in the tropics, Cougar. Well, now it is. That's what's happening to you. The next thing will be, but Tennessee isn't in the tropics. But Florida isn't in the tropics. But Washington, D.C. isn't in the tropics. Things are changing. Just let that be front of mind. Things are changing. The tropics are moving north and south. Who cares? They're moving north. The tropics are moving north. What's going to happen? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. So I just wanted to say that, I called it. It happened in Kansas 6 hours later. It's going to happen again. What, this afternoon? I don't know. We're in for it. The world is changing out from under us. There's no way that people in Kansas are ready to become the tropics of the U.S. and having cyclogenesis and tropical storms. There's no way they're ready for that. Nothing about their life, nothing about 200 years of kicking out the Indians and occupying Kansas. No part of that prepared them for this. And we're not prepared as a nation. And here it is. It's happening. It's happening. It's real. It's a real deal. How bad does it get? I don't know. How fast does it happen? Tomorrow? This afternoon? I have no idea. Global heating. That planet's getting hot. Shit's getting real. And if you think you understand what global heating means, sea level will rise by a half a centimeter a century. The temperature, the average temperature of the planet will raise by 1 degree C, 2 degrees Fahrenheit or so, a century, and we'll be fine. And it'll be, you don't know anything, okay? You don't know jack. They don't know what happened in Houston, and they're really not talking about what happened in Kansas. You don't know anything, okay? Stop pretending that you know what you're talking about when you're talking about global heating. Except you're not. You're talking about climate change. Global heating is real. Global heating is happening. The place is getting hot. What does that mean? Well, I guess we're going to find out. We really don't know yet. You think you know something? No, but you're about to find out. You're going to find out.